Western culture is a mess, and the side of common sense seems to be drowning under the well-funded forces of neo-socialism and net zero fascism. Taxpayers are treated as slaves in the gulag, working themselves to death only to have their money redistributed by government entities into corporate interests. Sometimes this is done through government green grants to billion-dollar renewable energy companies, but increasingly compulsory super contributions, now at 11%, are to blame, funneling public money into the coffers of union-led funds who will soon have more public money at their disposal than the 4 big banks combined, or $3.3 trillion. This money is used to bankroll net zero investments, creating a green bubble that is making life miserable for the peasants and slaves of the state. And so I ask, where are the charismatic and powerful voices of the opposition? Where are the heroes of common sense? Who is speaking for the people against this gangrenous political corporate tyranny? I weep for the loss of figures such as author and screenwriter Michael Crichton, who passed away in 2008. You may know him as the man behind Jurassic Park, a cautionary tale of human exploration into the godlike power of genetics. I wonder what he'd make of today's transhumanist movement and the global push to reduce humanity to a barcode. Crichton's most important lesson, in my opinion at least, was that of fear. In particular, the language of fear coming from the mouths of politicians. Ahead of his time, Crichton bailed the cat on the climate change movement and its misuse of apocalyptic rhetoric to scare well-intentioned citizens into acts of self-harm and civilizational collapse. He says it best here.
As some of you know, I spent the last several years exploring environmental issues, particularly global warming. I've been deeply disturbed by what I found, largely because the evidence for so many environmental issues is, from my point of view, shockingly flawed and unsubstantiated. But more troubling to me is the degree to which the political process seems to have captured and often corrupted the integrity of the scientific research that's used to formulate policy and to inform policy decisions.
This interview was given 20 years ago. 20. He gives many examples of ridiculous fear-mongering. Here is one.
The second thing I discovered was that attempts to provoke fear tended to employ a certain kind of stereotypic and very intense language. For example, here's a quote on climate. We simply cannot afford to gamble by ignoring it. We cannot risk inaction. Those scientists who say we are merely entering a period of climate instability are acting irresponsibly. The indications are that our climate can soon change for the worse are too strong to be reasonably ignored. Familiar language, isn't it? But this is not actually about global warming. It's about global cooling. Fear of a new ice age. Is anybody here worried about an ice age? Is anybody upset that we didn't act now, back then, to stockpile food and all the other things we were warned that we had to do?
Crichton goes on to talk about Michael Mann's graft used as evidence for the climate crisis, saying,
Mann's results appeared to show a spike in recent temperatures that was unprecedented in the last 1,000 years. And you see it there on the far right-hand side. As a result, his report achieved immediate and worldwide fame. It also formed the centerpiece of the UN's third assessment report in 2001, such that in the end, the Canadians' corrected graph looked quite different. Mann's original graph is the dark line, and the corrected graph is the red line. And as you see, just looking quickly, it suggests that the current temperature rise and the current state of global temperature, as contemporaneously measured, is very far from the warmest it's been in the last 1,000 years.
Can you believe that we're still having this conversation 20 years later? I can't. But if you want proof of Crichton's thesis regarding the subversive language and nature of climate change politics, look no further than the message pinned to the bottom of all his YouTube videos appearing under the heading of context. There's a helpful correction from the United Nations that seeks to manipulate the viewer's perception of the video content. In a cynical appeal to authority, the message comes up under the heading of climate action, which is a political, not a scientific position. This note defines climate change as a certainty, insisting that human activity is the main driver of climate change. Now, it goes on to assert as fact, not discussion, that we are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years, and then cites the very same figures that disputed IPCC report coming from Michael Mann's graph 20 years ago. Now, when Crichton gave his famous lecture warning about the excessively alarmist and deliberately frightening language, we may look no further than the cartoons used by the UN to strike fear into audiences. They've even managed to add a COVID face to one of them, as you can see here. Now, of course, no apocalyptic death cult is complete without a final call to arms, and by that I mean a call for donations. The climate cult is shaking its can at us, crying poor while trillions of dollars every year is taken from the taxpayer. Pay for your carbon sins, peasant, or the world will boil. This message appears on the bottom of videos that question the narrative in an Orwellian war against free and fair scientific discussion. What would Michael Crichton say if he could see the mess we're in today?